but they communicate in what would be considered non-traditional ways. And a parent becomes very receptive, or a carer becomes very receptive to what these are. And some of the fixedness of routines or behaviours, you'll soon come to find out a way an autistic child communicates this, if you've ever cared for an autistic child. I think parents are the experts on picking up on autistic communication, and some would hold that this in itself, the different ways of communicating, are for us as neurotypical or normally functioning people to make that leap into the autistic world, rather than them to make that leap into our world. But there are different takes on this, and I don't want to press home any one view of what is the best way really to class autism or to consider it, because I think, as I said before, it's different for different people. So let's look at the triad of impairment again. This is a very basic introduction to the formal academic take autism might be. There's an impairment in social interaction, and these can be characterized as difficulties in making sense of the world. And these can lead to behavior that appears, if you like, bizarre and often antisocial. And this isn't just in children, this is in adults as well. Now, people might withdraw totally or may attempt to interact, but may upset or bore or irritate others. And especially, unfortunately, sometimes we see this is the effect that people with Asperger's suffer. People see them as being different, they see them as being odd, and they're often isolated, and especially at school, people with high-functioning autism suffer from bullying. It's one of the ways that people at the more able end of autism are often really disadvantaged in terms of their social functioning, their group of friends, and they can be alienated, and this has an incredible impact on a lot of people's development, and it has a lifelong impact on how they feel about themselves and their identity. So speaking right across the range of disability there. So essentially this means problems forming relationships. Friendships, as I know, and teach my undergraduate students at Derby, are very, very important on my developmental psychology module. I teach my students that forming friendships is one of the ways we test out later adult relationships, and it has an impact on how we feel about ourselves, how we come to feel about other people. So friendships in early childhood especially, very important in development there. So the second of the triads of impairment are this impairment in verbal or non-verbal communication, difficulties in receptive language. That means understanding what people are saying, and often people with autism or Asperger's will take everything literally. In my research, I run a test where I give children some stories. And one of the stories shows an illustration of this boy, and the text that goes along with it says, this is Johnny, he's got ants in his pants. And the children have to select from the real meaning of that. And of course, the children that are on the autistic spectrum often opt for the slide. The picture illustrates Johnny jumping around and he's got ants all over himself, rather than the slightly irritated child there. So taking everything literally is very symptomatic of Asperger's syndrome. So difficulties in what are called pragmatic language, or the ability to interpret metaphor. People with Asperger's syndrome especially have problems understanding things like non-literal interpretation of language, we have found in the research there, or understanding facial expressions, tone of voice, gesture, and sometimes it's difficult for them to understand complex jokes. These are all difficulties in the verbal and non-verbal communication domain. So language is a very, very complex series of, if you like, sequential stages that a child has to pass through. Now, for a child with Asperger's or autism, these are grossly affected often. The third triad of impairment there is restricted, repetitive, or stereotyped patterns of behaviour. Often, people with autism find change very difficult, and they often develop obsessive interests. In children, we see this sometimes as things like stacking up bricks, or having a peculiar interest like trains or toy cars, or later in life it might be things like collecting train details, or knowing particular details about, say, baseball games or football games or something like that. But they often have this rigid or restricted behavioral pattern. So they can be, but not always, very set in routines. So a restricted repertoire of interests is one of the things that characterizes this impairment that we see in a lot of people, not all people, with autism.